Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring Meet the Colony casts. We're going to strip away the myths and uncover the fascinating, real-life biology of the queen, the workers, and the drones. Let's get started.
Okay, let's dive into this. What you're seeing here is exactly what a beekeeper sees when inspecting a frame, a top-down view right on the natural comb. Notice the three casts at their accurate relative scales. You've got one large queen, a few robust-looking drones, and they're completely surrounded by a massive number of smaller workers. Now, it's really easy to look at this scene and think of it as a society of individuals, right? But to truly understand honeybees, we actually have to shift our entire perspective on what a colony really is.
And that mental shift brings us right to the concept of the superorganism. You see, no individual honeybee can perform every single function required for long-term survival. An isolated bee, it will simply perish. Instead, vital tasks like reproduction, temperature control, defense, and food collection are distributed across the entire colony. So the colony itself, not the individual bee, is the actual enduring biological unit that stores food and survives from year to year. When you look at a hive, you aren't just looking at a box of bugs, you are looking at one incredibly complex, single living entity. To wrap our heads around this superorganism, we have to shatter one of the most enduring popular myths out there, the idea that the queen rules the hive. It's a great story, but the reality? No way. The queen is not a monarch commanding a tiny army. She doesn't issue instructions to workers or decide where they should forage today. Instead, she is the reproductive and chemical center of the colony. She organizes the hive's cohesion and behavior through incredibly powerful pheromones, chemical signals that guide the collective rather than dictating to it.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that honeybees operate on a fascinating genetic system called haplodiploidy. Basically, here's how it works. The queen can lay both fertilized and unfertilized eggs. The fertilized eggs develop into females, which become either queens or workers depending entirely on their diet and rearing environment. The unfertilized eggs, those develop into males, are drones. You can also see the common approximate emergence milestones here. A queen develops incredibly fast, emerging in just about 16 days. A worker takes around 21 days. And the drone, since he develops in a larger cell, takes the longest, averaging about 24 days.
Let's look a little closer at the queen's true biological duties. Early in her life, a virgin queen takes orientation and mating flights, where she mates with multiple drones high up in the air. She then stores all that sperm in a specialized organ called a spermatheca, and she'll literally draw from that single reserve for the rest of her life to fertilize eggs. Her primary job is laying those eggs, adjusting her output based on the season and available resources, and releasing those essential chemical signals. And here's a wild fact. If she begins to fail or her pheromones drop, the workers can rear a replacement completely without her permission. It's a process known as superseder.
So how do you actually spot her on the comb? Well, when you're looking from above, you really want to search for body proportions rather than color. Queens can be golden, striped, almost black or brown. Color is honestly an incredibly unreliable indicator of her caste, her age, or her quality. Instead, you're looking for a long, tapered abdomen that often extends quite a bit beyond the tips of her wings. Her thorax will appear broad and smooth, and her legs often look slightly longer and more splayed out as she purposefully navigates across the brood nest to lay eggs.
Moving on to the thousands of bees surrounding the queen, we hit another set of myths. A lot of people think workers are sexless, or that they're assigned one permanent job for life, kind of like a strict corporate career ladder. But the reality? Every single worker bee is female. While they are normally reproductively underdeveloped, they are very much female. And their tasks? They are highly flexible and generally age-related. They shift fluidly based on exactly what the superorganism requires at that specific moment in time. And this brilliantly illustrates that fluid progression as a worker ages. Shortly after emerging, young adult workers clean cells and nurse the developing brood using their specialized brood food glands. As they get a bit older, they transition into producing wax, building comb, and processing nectar. Later on, they might take on fanning for climate control, sanitation duties, or guarding the hive entrance. Finally, the oldest workers become foragers, braving the outside world to collect nectar, pollen, and water. But remember, this isn't a rigid schedule. If an emergency strikes, an older forager can absolutely revert to nursing duties to save the colony. Visually identifying workers is pretty straightforward. They are the smallest and by far the most numerous adults on the comb. Their abdomens are noticeably shorter than a queen's. Anatomically, they are literally the Swiss Army knives of the hive. They come equipped with a barbed sting for defense, specialized wax and scent glands, and if you look closely at the foragers returning to the hive, you can actually see pollen baskets on their hind legs, packed tightly with bright, colorful pollen.
Now, because there is no ruler giving orders, these female workers have to communicate constantly to make collective decisions, like when to swarm or where to forage. They do this through trophalexis, which is the fascinating exchange of liquid food and chemical information. They also perform the famous waggle dance to communicate the exact distance and direction to nectar sources. Plus, they use the Nasnov scent to help orient and assemble their sisters and release alarm pheromones to quickly recruit defenders if the hive is ever threatened.
Okay, let's talk about the males, the drones. They often get a pretty bad reputation. The common myth is that drones are just useless, lazy workers who drain the hive's resources. But the reality is that drones aren't workers at all, and their value is purely reproductive. They are absolutely essential for regional genetics. By flying out to mating areas to mate with virgin queens from other colonies, they transfer vital genetic diversity across the whole regional population. Honestly, without drones, the entire species would collapse. Identifying a drone on the comb is quite distinct. They have these broad, robust bodies that are noticeably larger than the workers. But the most obvious giveaway? Their enormous compound eyes that nearly meet right at the top of their head. It's an incredible evolutionary adaptation designed solely for spotting a fast-flying virgin queen high in the sky. They are literally built with their eyes on the prize. Their abdomens are blunt rather than tapered like a queen's. And importantly, drones have absolutely no sting whatsoever, and no pollen baskets. The drone's life cycle is highly specific and, honestly, quite dramatic. Like we mentioned, they emerge from unfertilized eggs. Their ultimate driving goal is to engage in a mating flight. But here's the catch. If a drone is actually successful in mating with the queen, the act is immediately fatal to him. And because they don't contribute to household labor or winter survival, their production by the colony is strictly seasonal. When autumn rolls around and resources become scarce, the colony ruthlessly evicts the remaining drones to conserve their precious winter food stores. So, the crucial point is that this dramatic mating strategy has a profound impact on the hive's genetics. Because a virgin queen mates with multiple drones in flight, she stores genetic material from many different males. This means that the thousands of worker bees inside a single hive are actually made up of diverse half-sister patrilines. This genetic diversity within the workforce is a massive advantage. It significantly improves the colony's overall temperament, productivity, disease resistance, and its resilience against changing environments. As a superorganism, the colony's population and activity shift beautifully with the changing seasons. In the spring, you see a massive buildup of brood and worker populations as the nectar starts flowing. Summer brings intense foraging, ventilation, and defense. But as a dearth of resources hits, or as fall approaches, the colony adapts. Brood rearing slows down, drones are evicted, and those long-lived winter workers hunker down to form a tight heat-generating winter cluster to survive the freezing cold. For the practical beekeeper, understanding this caste biology is exactly what makes hive inspections meaningful. You don't always need to see the queen to know she's there. Finding tiny rice-like eggs standing straight up in the cells indicates a laying queen was present within the last 3 days. On the flip side, if you see abnormal drone brood patterns, like scattered, bulging drone cells smack in the middle of the flat worker brood area, it could signal a failing queen, or even that the colony has been queenless for so long that workers have started laying unfertilized eggs themselves. Let's move to and see how this builds into an absolutely crucial health connection, particularly when it comes to the dreaded varroa mite. Remember earlier when we noted that drones have a longer 24-day average development cycle? Well, destructive varroa mites are highly opportunistic. They vastly prefer to invade and reproduce inside capped drone brood, precisely because those extra days give the mites a longer window to maximize their own reproduction. Understanding this little detail helps beekeepers monitor mite populations just by checking the drone comb. And it gets worse, because those mites don't just feed on the bees, they transmit devastating viruses. When you're inspecting your casts, you have to keep an eye out for serious viral clues in the adult population. You might see workers with visibly deformed stubby wings or unusually shortened abdomens. But a quick word of caution here. The absence of visible symptoms does not automatically prove your hive has a low mite count. Proactive, regular testing is absolutely essential for the superorganism's survival. So we've explored the intricate balance of the superorganism, from the flexible female workers and the essential male drones, right up to the chemical influence of the queen. Recognizing these castes is the absolute foundation of beekeeping. But, just seeing a queen is really only half the battle. Judging her actual performance requires reading the evidence she leaves behind on the comb.
which leads us perfectly to our next critical question. How do you know your hive has a healthy queen?